Hello, all. I'm Beth Jarris, Vice President of the Association of Public Data Users, and I want to welcome you to this rapid response data briefing on critical rules for the 2030 census, co-hosted by Data Index, the Association of Public Data Users, Population Reference Bureau, the Leadership Conference Education Fund, Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force, Population Association of America, and Association of Population Centers. Given the pace of changes in data across the federal government, we've created this briefing series to raise awareness about potential risks to public data and, most importantly, how you can take action. And if you've been to these before, you'll notice that this one breaks format a bit. To date, we've shared ways to take action when there are calls for public comment posted in the Federal Register. Today, we're sharing an opportunity for action upstream from that, and our panelists are here to tell you more about it. We'll be sharing some specific actions, and after the webinar, we'll follow up by email with the recording, slides, and links. We have just 30 minutes together today, but if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A box. If we have any time left after our panelists speak, we'll try to answer a question or two. If we do not have time, we will include as many answers as we can in our follow-up email. I feel like I say this every time, but that's because it's true. Today we have an all-star panel. Each of our panelists hold multiple distinguished roles, but since we have just 30 minutes, I'm going to highlight just one for each of them. Allison Plyer is co-chair of the Census Quality Reinforcement Task Force. Thomas Saenz is president and general counsel of MALDEF. Terry Alminas is vice president of census and voting programs at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. And Christopher Stephen Markham is senior advisor of federal data policy at the Federation of American Scientists. Together, they will walk us through what's going on with this proposed rule for the 2030 census. But first, let's walk through what we're referring to. The Department of Commerce submitted a proposed rule on, and I quote, Decennial Census of the Population of Americans, Proposed Residence Criteria, and Proposed Regulations for Demographic Questions. And that's it. All we have is the title. But from that title, and in the context of associated signals we're seeing, our panel thinks three changes may be possible. Changes to residence criteria, changes to demographic questions, including adding a citizenship question, and while this proposed rule may or may not address race and ethnicity, there are enough reasons for concern that we're covering that today too. Before we get into potential risks, I'm going to break down the demographic questions piece just a bit. Next slide, please. Since 2000, we have asked everyone in the US just 10-ish questions, kind of depends on how you count. Some questions are asked just of the primary respondent, some only of others, and some have subparts, but we'll call it 10 questions on how many people are living here, or are there additional people, whether the home is owned or rented, telephone number, which is asked only of the person one, name, age and date of birth, sex, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, race, and two questions asked of everyone but person one. Does this person usually live or stay somewhere else? And how is this person related to person one? In 1990, the short form had a similar list of questions, but also included marital status. In 1980, the short form was like 1990, but also included education. Next slide, please. In general, this brief list of questions strikes a really strong balance between collecting necessary information for things like redistricting without burdening respondents unnecessarily. And it's really important to note that race, age, and sex have been asked of every person in every US decennial census. Next slide, please. And you might be wondering, but what about other things we need to know? Fear not, tons of additional detail is available through the American Community Survey, which is a modern iteration of the old census long form. So if you want to know about education, you've got that in ACS. Citizenship, also in the American Community Survey. Lots of detail goes there so that it helps balance the burden between ease of collection with the decennial census and level of detail with the American Community Survey. So that's background on demographic questions. And Allison, I'm going to invite you to move on to the other part of the title. Can you walk us through what residence criteria are and why they're important?
Sure, thanks, Beth. So the decennial census has to count every person once and at their usual residence. And residence criteria clarify what usual residence means. So many of us, but not all of us, many of us are kind of straightforward and we live in one home year round, but not me. I split my year between New Orleans and the Chicago area. And this is increasingly the case. Increasingly, we see more complexity in the US and how and where people live. For many people with more than one home, residence criteria really define which home they should be counted at. Without clear criteria, deployed military personnel and transient workers could be missed or not counted in the right place. And the rules are sometimes controversial. For college students, their parents or guardians might think that they should be counted at the parental home, but college is where the student live most of the time, and that's the residential criteria. In 2020, residence criteria for incarcerated populations generated strong public reaction, and Beth will post in the chat an example of some of that reaction. So the residence criteria are periodically reviewed and updated to reflect changes in housing, mobility, and living arrangements, and of course to align with constitutional and statutory obligations. So for example, in 2020, as the number of people owning second homes continued to expand, the residence criteria provided updated guidance regarding seasonal homes, RVs, and also situations like transitory workers. Public input has been essential to the development of updated residence criteria, and transparent and clear guidance is essential for respondents and enumerators to really accurately operationalize the criteria. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Allison. That was a fantastic summary. Tom, now that Allison has explained what residence criteria are, can you share what changes might be proposed in this new rule?
Thanks, Beth. What we
And
expect and indications from filings of the United States in at least one court case is that the administration will attempt to discount certain immigrants entirely from the census by defining their residence as their country of origin rather than where they actually live in the United States. This is not likely to affect all immigrants. It will be confined to undocumented immigrants as well as those with temporary status, including folks with TPS or temporary protected status, those with deferred action, including DACA holders, and others who have some form of withholding because they are in a process of removal, but that process has come to at least a temporary conclusion. So we know that there is an attempt to discount the undocumented from the count used to reapportion the Congress, which is the first and actually the only constitutionally explicit use of the census, which is to reallocate the 435 seats in the United States House of Representatives. We have two ongoing cases, Missouri versus United States Department of Commerce and Louisiana versus United States Department of Commerce. Both contend that in fact the Constitution requires that the undocumented be discounted. Now, these are cases that have been tried in the past. Last decade, for example, Alabama filed against the United States Department of Commerce. Important to note that last decade they filed in 2018. This decade they filed in the year ending with a 5. So they've started sooner, and that relates to what is required to actually accomplish what they wish to accomplish. But in any event, we expect to see in the residence criteria put forward is some attempt to reallocate undocumented and temporarily present immigrants as not counting as residents of the United States because their residence, they will assert, is in their country of origin. Beth?
next slide, please.
This is what we have filed in the Missouri case, which is what you've already seen, an indication that they are in process on that residence rule change, that it is being reviewed internally and will go public at some point soon, though we don't know the timeline. So this will obviously have implications for the census questionnaire itself.
Thank you, Tom. You shared some compelling context about the residence criteria, and I think with this, with the court document, it really makes the case pretty clear. But let's turn to the demographic questions. Could a citizenship question be added, and if so, what are the implications?
Yeah, so the issue actually goes beyond the citizenship question because in order to distinguish the undocumented, those with TPS, with deferred action, et cetera, from lawful permanent residents or green card holders, they would actually have to add a status question, which is obviously unprecedented. We can surmise it would have some of the effects as some of the same effects as a citizenship question, which is to deter participation, to create all kinds of confusion, to require the Bureau to engage in an unprecedented educational effort to try to get good data in response to such a question. All of that would be multiplied if it were a status question. And a status question is what they need in order to distinguish the undocumented, for example, from lawful permanent residents or green card holders. And you can just imagine what a status question would elicit, including from multi-generational citizens who wouldn't know how to answer a status question. And so you can expect there would be lots of garbage data, even more confusion, even more cost involved in trying to get accurate data. At the same time, we know that the overarching effect, and probably one intended by this administration, would be to deter and reduce participation and increase, therefore, the undercount of particular communities. So we're looking not just at the prospect of a citizenship question, whose purpose beyond deterring participation would be to discount non-citizens in redrawing lines at the state and local level, redistricting, not counting them in terms of making the populations relatively equal district to district. But the point of a status question is actually to discount certain immigrants entirely from everything the census is used for, beginning with reapportionment.
Thank you, Tom. That is alarming and reason for concern, I think. Terry, thinking about other demographic questions in the decennial census, race questions have been asked in every census since the first in 1790. Can you tell us why race is so important? And I imagine we might want to see regulations that reinforce standards that were adopted in 2024, but we're not likely to. And in fact, we're seeing some reasons for concern. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Beth. So, race and ethnicity data are fundamental for enforcing civil rights laws, distributing government funds, and guiding public policy and other decision-making endeavors. Race and ethnicity data are used to identify areas where minority groups may face systemic disadvantages, help guide the over $2 trillion federal dollars that annually go to the states, and are used to identify problems and needs for specific communities and to develop efficient and effective solutions tailored to those needs. Finally, race and ethnicity data and the collection of such ensures that self-identification and visibility are respected, with individuals being the most authoritative sources of their own identities and all communities being important. Respondents and communities should be able to see themselves in the fabric of America. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, we have been seeing warning signs about the federal government moving away from race and ethnicity data. First, we've seen race and ethnicity being removed from other data collection. For example, we saw a Federal Register notice regarding HHS's Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which would no longer have data on race, ethnicity, and gender in their annual report on household assisted by LAHEAP. The EEOC submitted a proposed rule to the White House seeking to end collection of EEO1, EEO3, EEO4, and EEO5, which provide demographic data across private and public sectors when it comes to employment. Finally, and most concerning for many, there was a Federal Register notice regarding revisions to the 2027 American Community Survey, which noted that the Census Bureau will not be implementing the new SBD 15 race and ethnicity standards beginning in 2027, thereby walking back their previous position in a December 2025 Federal Register notice that they would indeed implement the new standards in the 2027 ACS. Second, we have seen the actual implementation of the modernized race and ethnicity standards, that is the 2024 SBD 15, being slowed or reversed, with OMB pushing back the deadline for the submission of implementation plans to March 2027 from the initial deadline of September 2025. With respect to the deadline for full implementation of standards, it remains, at least at this moment, March 28, 2029. Next slide, please. To understand what might be covered in a race and ethnicity rule, either in form or function, we need to understand SBD 15, OMB's standard on race and ethnicity data collection, reporting, and maintenance over the years. SBD 15 was initially developed in 1977 to ensure consistency on race and ethnicity data collection throughout the federal government. The 1977 SBD 15 required for the first time that the federal government use the racial categories of American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian or Pacific Islander, Black, and White, as well as the ethnic categories of Hispanic origin or not of Hispanic origin. The 1997 SBD 15 revised the 1977 standards and created separate categories for Asian and Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, as well as allowed respondents to report multiple races. Most recently in 2024, SBD was once again revised and required the collection of race and ethnicity data together as part of a single combined question, added a new MENA ethnic category, meaning these categories would no longer exclusively be captured under the white racial category, and required the collection of additional detailed race and ethnicity responses, allowing for data disaggregation. While this was allowed previously on a voluntary basis, most agencies simply failed to do so, thereby necessitating the mandatory nature of this change. So what might we see? Well, we could see a rollback to a previous version of the standard, whether that be 1997 or 1977. Regardless of where we land, any backsliding will be detrimental to our communities and our country. The 2024 revised standards were based on extensive research previously conducted by federal agencies, including the Census Bureau's 2015 National Content Test, and extensive public input, including public comments, public town halls, and public listening sessions. This was a rigorous and scientific process that sought to reflect the current landscape of our country while continuing to provide useful data for the purposes noted previously. Moving away from these updated standards would mean, at best, outdated standards that no longer work for our ever-diversifying nation. We continue to monitor and believe it is important to continue to highlight the importance of the revised standards. Thank you, and I'm turning it back to you.
Thank you so much for that thorough review, Terry. Really appreciate it. And Chris, this whole process is upstream from the calls for comment we usually direct people to. Can you explain how this step works?
Absolutely, Beth. Thank you. So the reason that we know that the census is engaging in this rulemaking is because it was posted on the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, reginfo.gov website. This posting is consistent with Executive Order 12866, which establishes the rulemaking process for presidential or executive branch review, in addition to the normal notice and comment review that we typically advocate for with under the Administrative Procedures Act. The 12866 meeting is a part of this review, and I'll try to walk through a little bit about how that will work. So we have an opportunity for public comment in the future once Census publishes the Federal Register notice. Right now, the rule is currently under initial review with the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and under their 12866 process meetings, they should be offering an opportunity for the public to engage directly with the agency and with OIRA on the proposed rulemaking. Let me go to the next slide, please. So how we're going to, so what the 12866 meetings are all about is that it's an opportunity for your organization and the public to provide information on, in general, that might be relevant, even in the absence of a formal abstract or a strong description of the proposed rulemaking. And on the 12866 meeting website, request website, you'll see an RIN number, and if Beth could drop that into the chat. Thank you. We have a tiny URL link here as well. You just need to fill out your name, some biographical information about you, what the nature of the comments you have, and OIRA will consider whether or not to, thank you for next slide, OIRA will consider whether or not to have a meeting. At these meetings, what will typically happen is that OIRA and the agency will be invited, as well as on occasion other members from the Executive Office of the President. They will be in listening mode, and the presenters or the requesters of the meeting can provide their information. They'll have about 30 minutes. They're typically held over Zoom, and any information or slides or supplemental documentation that you'd like to submit, you can submit to OIRA, and it'll become part of the official docket that becomes available to the public. Now, these meetings, again, are from the executive branch's perspective, they are in listening mode. You cannot ask questions about the proposed rulemaking. You're there to provide information to OIRA and to the agency. It is really a manner in which the public can provide expertise and opinion to the agency for OIRA to consider during their review. After the review period, typically the agency will make revisions, and then you'll see the Federal Register notice where the public comment period will open. Once those public comment period closes, there's another opportunity for 12866 review. And so that will be during the finalization rule. And so what happens is the draft rule is revised by the agency. OIRA does a second review, and at that point, there's another opportunity for 12866 meetings. And at that time, during finalization, of course, we've had an opportunity to see what the rule will be. Next slide. So what I'd like to add here is that if your organization does decide to submit a request for a 12866 meeting, you can let us know, and you can email us at info@dataindex-us. We're here to help, and we would like to help keep track of all the organizations that might be requesting meetings for this particular rulemaking.
Thank you so much, Chris. This is a complex process, and your walkthrough is incredibly helpful. So with the process questions, you addressed most of them, but there is one that came in the chat, and it sort of brings us back around to where I started at the beginning, that right now all we have is the title. So the question is, should we wait until we have the text to determine whether our specific issue or concern is within the scope of being discussed? And I know we've talked about this a little bit. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So first, I'd like to point out that it is perfectly normal in this process for there only to be a title. Sometimes, if the rulemaking has previously been posted in the uniform agenda or uniform regulatory agenda, there might be a short abstract, but this is perfectly normal. My opinion is that you should comment early and often. And so you'll have an opportunity now to provide technical information or opinion about a proposed rulemaking. And then once we see the final rulemaking, you can tune those messages and request an additional meeting during the final review. And so 2 opportunities to have meetings and comment.
There is another question that is in the chat, and Tom, I suspect this one is for you. Does the expectation that the administration would add a status question in addition to a citizenship question if trying to exclude undocumented migrants and those with TPS from apportionment mean that they've gotten more sophisticated and tailored in policy to achieve those aims? If a status question is necessary to accomplish this, why didn't they try to do it during the first Trump administration?
So it's a good question. I think the main reason is they didn't understand that the Bureau would insist on an actual enumeration and then concluded that the only actual enumeration of undocumented people they could accomplish was of those in detention. Now, I think you could add to that those in some process of removal. So they're in the middle of court proceedings with respect to removal, but that's really all you can document. And when it's such a small percentage of the total undocumented population, there's very little legal argument for why you should exclude the 10, 15, 20% that you're able to identify when you can't identify 80%. So I do think they figured out that they have to get a question added to the 100% census, and I suspect that's why Missouri and Louisiana filed in 2025, whereas Alabama filed in 2018. It was far too late in 2018 to include a status question that had never been tested in any possible configuration. So I do think they've become more sophisticated, understand they're not going to accomplish what they want to accomplish without a status question.
Thank you. All right. And I think that is about where we will wrap up. Melanie, can you bring our slides back up just for a couple of final thoughts? That in terms of take action, we're going to suggest that you request a 12866 meeting, and that link will be shared by email. You also always can sort of stay tuned to dataindex-us for additional information, other breaking news kinds of events like this, and you can register for Take Action office hours, a monthly time period where you can drop in and ask questions. In addition, we recommend that you sign up for Federal Data Forum at .prb.org, where people can share information as they have it, and you can get a daily or weekly digest of those reports. So I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I want to thank all of you participants for caring about public data. And just as a reminder, in case you missed any of the links, we will be sharing slides, the list of actions, and the webinar recording by email within the next couple of days. Now go request a meeting. Thank you all.